Hello and welcome to Simcast, the higher education simulation podcast. My name's Tony Jeremy. I'm the academic lead for simulation-based education at UEA Norwich.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Simcast. My name's Lawrence Hill and I chair the simulation group in the School of Health Sciences at UEA Norwich.
In today's episode, we are doing another one of our top fives. So we are going through our site model. So the kind of the four key categories surrounding information, team and equipment. And today we're going to go through our top five simulation information.
Yes, and we haven't conferred at all, have we, about these and the rules? So the rules of engagement.
The rules of engagement is we haven't seen what each other's top five are.
And there's been absolutely no briefing other than pick your top five pieces of information that relate to simulation-based education.
It's going to be interesting to see how we've approached this. If you enjoyed the episode, give us a like. Equally so, if you don't like the episode, give us a dislike, but let us know in the comments why, because we're always keen to improve. To keep up to date with all things Sim, subscribe to the channel and don't forget to check that notification bell. And Simcast is available on all popular streaming platforms.
Okay, so coming in at number 5 then.
So, who went first last time?
Can't remember. It's your turn to go first this time.
Okay, it's my turn to go first. Evens is my turn. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so top five information. So number 5 for me. And I really struggled with the order, to be honest with you, because each of these could have been potentially interchangeable. Now, personally, when I do simulation, I don't like slides. But I think if there's any presentation slide that needs to go up, it's this one, which is the basic assumption.
Oh, that's good.
So if I'm going to put any slide up in a simulation event, it's the basic assumption. And I think even if it isn't a physical or a digital slide, in terms of information, it has to be up there.
Oh, I feel like I've done myself completely by not including the basic assumption. So no, I think that's a great place to start. It's a great place to open this kind of top 5 because actually that basic assumption should be a hallmark of all good simulation.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I really like that. That's a really good place to start. I didn't go there.
Okay, so before we look at yours, for the benefit of anyone who hasn't heard of the basic assumption before, the basic assumption is that we must make an assumption that everyone taking part in simulation is intelligent, capable people, and they're there because they want to learn. Yeah. Importantly, regardless of outcome.
Yeah, that they care about what they're doing and they want to improve.
And that we as educators should genuinely care about that basic assumption.
Yeah, and for me, I always make a point of saying it's the only assumption that I'm making about today. So the only assumption I'm making today is this. And I wonder whether the students get a bit bored of me saying it, whether it's kind of being a bit like over the top, but it is an important piece of information to assert.
I think I also use it as an opportunity to reaffirm that it's not an opportunity for assessment. I did this on Monday. So in a sim session a couple of days ago, I used the basic assumption. And again, I was like, this is an opportunity. And it was with a learner group that I'm not usually doing sim with. And I just said it's an opportunity to learn. It's not about assessment. And all we want you to do is work with us to try and get the best out of this sim.
Nice. Okay, so in 5th place, in terms of my most important pieces of information, I've gone for the relevant guidelines or legislation.
Yeah, good. Really good point.
Yeah, because I thought, of the other things that I've got on this list, actually, I felt like it would be remiss to sort of leave off the clinical guidelines or if it's sort of mental health related or if it's some other kind of psychosocial simulation, the relevant legislation. Because obviously not all simulation is going to be, A to E assessment, cardiac arrest. A lot of simulation is about teasing out those more delicate, sensitive areas. And sometimes that depends on legislation, exploring legislation.
So policies and guidelines, have them available for the learners, have them physically there on site when you're doing the sim?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
No, but it's just having the simulation informed by those pieces of information. Okay. Yeah. So they're not there on the day, but they are...
I guess there's an argument to have them there just in case though.
If they're accessible, I mean, if it's something like the Mental Capacity Act, then that's not going to work.
But if it's an ALS algorithm,
then it is going to work and it's entirely appropriate to have it there.
Yeah.
But no matter what we do in sim, it should be evidence-based. And that's why I thought I'll have the relevant guidelines and legislation there on the agenda.
Yeah, that's a great choice.
Where did you go for number 4?
Okay, so number 4, in terms of information, I have gone for, and what I've put is faculty email or information before the event.
Okay, so in number 4, I have the briefing for faculty.
Excellent. So we were same sort of thing, same sort of lines.
So and by that I meant the same sort of thing that you're talking about there. And by briefing, I don't necessarily. I mean partly the briefing on the morning or the day or whatever it is, but I also mean
in the run up to it.
In the run up to it, so that there's an established sense of we're all in this team together. Has anyone got any questions?
A shared mental model. An opportunity for clarification. An opportunity to jog people's memories that they might have committed to this simulation activity or event. Oh yeah, I've got that coming up. I need that to. So I think the pre-planning is probably as important as the on the day briefing.
Yeah, definitely, and it just really helps to settle the nerves, doesn't it? If you know when you're doing it, roughly what you're going to be doing. Perhaps there's an outline of the course that the events that are going to take place. Just helps to situate it so you know your role in it, and I think that's really important. And sounds like you do too.
Yeah, singing from the same hymn sheet.
Singing from the same hymn sheet. Where did you go for number 3 then?
Okay, so number 3. This is a little bit of a kind of I guess, a selfish one because I'm the academic lead for simulation-based education, but I've gone with simulation strategy.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, nice. So,
and also thinking in the back of my mind, I really need to update our simulation strategy. But, it should form the basis of everything that you do if you're involved in simulation. Or should it, if you're not actively involved in writing a simulation strategy, your work should be informed by a decent strategy.
Yeah. Aligned with a strategy, informed by a strategy. Yeah. So something that situates the whole program of simulation.
Yeah. And then, we're talking about, a really effective and powerful mission statement, making sure that you've got clear goals and they are, you've done a SWOT analysis, or that, you've got smart objectives. So you've got something attainable and achievable.
Yeah, and I suppose within that strategy, you'll also have like kind of quality assurance in terms of what kind of education and training for simulation-based education have the faculty had.
Absolutely.
And so it's about standard setting and about ensuring that everything's in line with that. Yeah, that's great. What a good suggestion.
And 2 birds with one stone. We'll be using the site model to inform the strategy in terms of those key components. So again, it's thinking about having a logical structure that works in a day-to-day way, day-to-day fashion.
Oh, cool.
What was your number 3?
Well, I've gone for the briefing again.
Okay.
But this time, this is the learner briefing.
Right.
So on the day of the simulation, so I've got faculty briefing at number 4 and then learner briefing at number 3. I feel like that... otherwise referred to as the pre-brief, which I don't really like.
Don't
get me started on that again. But the briefing that is there to set out the mutual expectations, and I suppose should be or could be preceded with the basic assumption. But yeah, that piece of the simulation event that is there to set out the rules of engagement of the simulation itself, the intended learning outcomes, and a management really of the experience from a learner and from a faculty perspective. Yeah,
it was definitely on my potential list, I think. And yeah, it could well have been up in my top 5. It was probably one that I thought, well, faculty briefing, if you get that right, you're probably going to get your student briefing right.
Yeah.
So, but it was, certainly up there for me. But I haven't actually picked that as one of my top 5.
Yeah.
But it's certainly a legitimate one for the top 5.
Thank you for legitimising my choice. So clearly important for me because it's for me the briefing is the kind of the point at which the plan meets the students.
Yeah.
And communicating that bit of it is really key for a successful simulation
event. One of the reasons I went with faculty email, because I was also thinking student email. So making sure those students are nice and clear about what they are about to take part in terms of their simulation, which then feeds into the basic assumption. So joining up the dots between all of those things, I think.
Where did you go for number 2 then? What have you got in number 2 as your second most important or relevant piece of information?
So number 2, I was thinking, okay, I need to now deliver the simulation. So for me, a really decent scenario writing template, I think, is really important.
Okay, that's a good idea. Yeah, so like, this kind of relates to your previous point about simulation strategy as well. So, what do you think the benefits are of a sim writing template?
I've been a simulation facilitator. I've coordinated my own simulation and had facilitators who have been providing simulation scenarios for me, and I've also been a facilitator for someone else. And I just think that unless you have a really sort of decent concrete scenario writing template, you're often as a facilitator, particularly the first couple of sims, getting to grips with that template. And often it is...
Yeah, very true.
A lot of the times it's not really a template. It's someone has been tasked with doing some sim. They've put something together into a Word document. I wouldn't say they necessarily haven't thought about the template, but perhaps what they're thinking about more is writing the scenario rather than the usability of a template. Yeah. And actually, for the facilitators on the day, that's really important because I've been in multiple situations where I've been fudging through the template, trying to find some information to give to the learners as the sim is taking place.
Yeah, this is a question of human factors ergonomics, isn't it? Actually, familiarity and standardization with the tools for delivery, the pieces of information for delivery, actually helps to reduce the cognitive load on the facilitator. When you're occupying multiple roles and you're trying to take note of what's being said and observe and maybe adjust parameters if you're using some kind of technology, having familiarity with where you can find the information is really useful.
So I've developed my own template, and again, I've tried to think about it as the end user, as the facilitator. So the template is grab and go. It's designed to be sort of two-sided max, and I think the real key there is getting in enough information that you don't make it 4 or 5 pages. Feeling that you have to put everything into the scenario, so it is grab and go. But also that trade-off between actually, depending on what you're simulating, will depend on the information that the facilitator needs. It might be some physical observations and arbitrary values and things like that. It might be a simulation around an end-of-life conversation, in which case the content is completely different. But I think, there's information that needs to go to the learners. There's information that the facilitator needs to know in terms of how the scenario unfolds. There might be some information that an actor, confederate, whatever we want to call it, see our previous episode on the language of simulation. There's those kind of recurring themes that actually you can capture in a well-structured template. And I would advocate that any simulation center or department tries to put together their own template so that people get familiar with it. So it's not just one of those things that you have to think about as a facilitator. It's just grab and go. I'm familiar with it. Color coding, anything like that is always a step in the right direction for me.
Cool. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, good idea.
What about your number 2?
So my number 2 is unintended learning outcomes.
Oh.
So I think that what we almost always see in any simulation event are unintended learning outcomes. And for me, these are often some of the most profound aspects of the debrief.
Yeah.
And, the things that people take away at the end. So I don't know about you, but when I close a debrief, I'll often just kind of ask what the takeaway learning outcomes are. And I'll have the intended learning outcomes in mind, and I'll be like, well, that wasn't on the list, but brilliant.
Yeah.
That's great. I'm really pleased you've learned that today. And I guess I love the spontaneity of these unintended learning outcomes and the
but that's
depth.
the nature of sim, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. You create, if you can create or curate a learning experience which is immersive or authentic in some way, the way that it triggers those connections with the real world, often I think are those spontaneous connections are some of the best things. So that's why I put them at number 2, because they're often some of the most profound pieces of information that come out of a simulation.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I've concentrated on almost the sort of pre-prepared information that can be captured. I'm just wondering now, bearing in mind those unintended learning outcomes are so powerful, we often don't capture them, do we?
They're not. We don't usually record them.
We don't record them. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, and they kind of. There's an argument to say that the discussion and the information within a simulation environment is sacred to that event, although it can be used outside.
Yeah.
To transfer learning, but we don't always capture those, do we?
No, we don't, and that's an interesting one because how would you like because they're so individualized, I think often. We
do sometimes because we use those extraordinary situations as examples sometimes. And I've definitely been in debriefs where I've talked about previous simulations whilst also bearing in mind
the confidentiality, Chatham House rules
Chatham
type
House
stuff.
rules, but use those as examples, particularly those powerful unintended learning outcomes.
Yeah.
And we've given several examples on our previous episodes, haven't we, of powerful learning that's come through some of the sim that we've been doing.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess that's. But how you then use them, I suppose they're they're individual to the facilitator as well, aren't they? Because the unintended learning outcomes that you might bear witness to as a facilitator in a simulation event, I wouldn't necessarily, unless we debrief as a faculty together afterwards and say, hey, do you know what came out? This was really interesting.
Yeah. And also when I'm debriefing, I'm not always thinking about capturing things. I'm thinking about the discussion and facilitating that. We do have whiteboards in our debrief rooms. It would be very easy to write those things down, but I'm not always thinking about them. Yeah.
And sometimes I think actually there's something quite nice about them just existing in the moment.
Yeah.
And that actually we don't have to document them because actually they are relevant to that person at that time.
Yeah.
So that's why I put them at number 2.
It's a great choice.
Oh, thanks. What did you put at number 1?
Well, I wonder if we've got similar again.
I would hope so, but considering how much we bang on about it.
So for me, it's the most important part of the simulation activity. So for me, particularly for facilitators new to simulation, it's a debrief model.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, no, that's different to me.
Oh, okay.
So a debrief model. Okay, great. So you're having a structured.
So you can see where I've gone here. I've gone really very physical pieces of information, rather than kind of And you've looked at information differently.
I have looked at information differently. But you've in having a structured model for debriefing, you've centered that as an important piece of information. Why? Because
the debrief is so critical. And I've seen what happens when debriefing turns into feedback, turns into hero talking about their experiences. So actually having a debrief model doesn't necessarily mean that the facilitator will follow it, but it's a useful guide to help nurture that environment where effective, reflective debriefing can take place.
Yeah, I really like that. It's a good suggestion, and it's what you've done also really nicely there with your selection is you've started with the basic assumption and ended with the debrief, which is a really neat way of
continuum. I wasn't thinking about that.
Oh well, you did it anyway. So that's really interesting because actually I agree with you that and I dare say that most people listening would agree that the debrief is integral and getting that right is important.
And I'd say it's the most complex thing to get right in simulation because it's a complex
social
endeavor.
As Dijkman said. Yeah, it is. And having some kind of structure to make it feel coherent as a learning experience is really, really useful and important. Yeah. Well, I mean,
I'm interested to see what you went with.
Well, I mean, I've gone my top most important piece of information for any simulation-based event. I've said is the intended learning outcomes.
Okay, right.
Which was really interesting
because you've got to start with your outcomes.
Because if you don't know from the outset before you start planning the event, before you start briefing the event, what it is you're trying to achieve, then for me, the whole exercise is just an exercise in simulation for simulation's sake.
Yeah.
So for me,
look at this fancy kit and equipment that we've got.
Exactly.
Let's do a sim.
Yeah. So it's about simulation is a vehicle for facilitating learning. And in a previous episode, our friend and colleague Dr. Rosie Doy advocated a bonfire of of learning outcomes.
You took that to heart, didn't you?
But for me, it's absolutely essential that we have a central point to both begin the briefing and close the debrief, and to ensure that, you know, no matter what happens in that debrief discussion, that actually it ends on or coalesces around a point, which is this is what we set out to achieve. We've achieved all of this stuff in all of these different ways, but this is what we set out to achieve. So for me, the most important piece of information in simulation-based education are good intended learning outcomes.
Great. So we've looked at it quite differently. I think arguably, I don't think we would say of any of those top fives, mine or yours, they don't deserve to be in a top five. And I think when I've listened to yours, I've gone, yeah, I should have really considered that. So I think they're all legitimate top fives. It'd be really interesting to hear if anyone else has got any top fives. Anything obvious that you think we've missed, let us know in the comments below.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much, Tony. I've enjoyed that top five information. It has been interesting, thought-provoking, and I hope you've enjoyed it too, listening in. Be interested, as Tony said, to hear whether there's anything else that you think we've missed. And yeah, thank you very much for listening to the podcast. We hope to see you on the next one.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.